Hey, what is going on? And today we're going to cover a Q&A session with a number of questions ranging from how to maintain fat loss to making progress while drinking alcohol and the truth about recomposition, the process of losing fat and building muscle. Now, as a quick reminder with the Eric Bach Show, on Mondays we will post a Q&A available on Instagram at Bach Performance. So anytime you have questions, you want them covered, make sure you check us out there. And frankly, anytime you want to find the best information that you can on looking great naked without living in the gym, at Bach Performance on Instagram is a great place for you to start. Now, let's jump right into it. Recomposition. Recomposition is the process of building muscle and losing body fat. And so the majority of people I talk to, when I first talk to them, they say, I want to lose fat and build muscle. Great. Fantastic goal. And so what we need to understand about this process is we have fat loss on one side, we have building muscle on the other, and in the middle is that recomp where we want to straddle both. And so inherently, we need to understand that trying to do both building muscle and losing fat tends to lead to suboptimal results in both areas. And so this is where a lot of people end up struggling. You see, when you first get started in the gym, you probably built some muscle and lost body fat. And so your expectation is that that's going to continue. It's going to be easy, or you're going to be able to continue with this recomposition process. But the reality is, the longer that you train, the more important it is to specialize in certain areas. And in fact, unless you're a beginner, or unless you were in good shape and now you're getting back into shape, or now you just started TRT or anabolics, it's very difficult to simultaneously build muscle and lose body fat within the same training program, at least to a measurable amount. And so what happens is, people will straddle this goal of trying to recomp, of building muscle and losing body fat at the same time. But progress is so painstakingly slow that they think what they're doing isn't working because they don't really have an accurate unit of measurement. And so what happens, for lack of a better term, it becomes a bit of a mind fuck, and people end up self-sabotaging with that process. And so the key thing to understand here is, unless you're a beginner, unless you were in good shape and you're getting back into shape for the first time, or first time in a while, or you're on anabolics, it's very difficult to both lose fat and build muscle. And the way you should approach it is focus on which of those two goals is going to have the biggest impact for you, and understand that you might build a little bit of lean muscle if you're cutting up, or you might lose a little bit of body fat if you are trying to bulk up. But that should be a bonus. It should not be the expectation, because as you get more advanced, again, your room for error in chasing any one of these goals gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So with recomposition, here's what I find. I find the vast majority of people, when they want to lose fat and build muscle, and let's say they don't meet those previous conditions that I mentioned about them being a beginner on steroids, were in shape before, but are now just getting back into shape for the first time, what I recommend is going and focusing on fat loss first. And the reason is, as your body gets leaner, you're going to improve things like insulin sensitivity. You're going to see the muscle definition that you already have. You're going to have healthier health biomarkers across the board. Your blood work is often going to be much better. And you're also going to see, hey, do I really need to build muscle, or is that just something I'm doing because that's what I think I need to do? The reality is, once we start getting leaner, we start to see a lot of different changes. And for most people, they actually end up looking bigger and better when they're leaner because of the enhanced muscle definition. So recomposition, can you do it? Yes, but unless you meet those conditions, it's very difficult to do and make meaningful progress. Losing fat first is almost always your best bet, and then you'll be able to build lean muscle more effectively later on. All right, the second question coming in is, what is the most important factor for maintaining fat loss? All right, this is pretty wild. So you can see a number of different studies on this, but the average person who loses, I believe it's 10% of their body weight, within a year, 80% of those people will gain that weight back. And over the course of 3 years, that moves north of 90%. And so the reality is, we don't necessarily have much of a weight loss problem as we do a weight maintenance problem, being able to keep that weight off. And so the primary issue that leads to that is a lack of sustainable options that people follow when it comes to losing body fat, right? Think of something like 75 hard. 2 workouts a day, following this crazy ass workout plan. And you know what? When people do it, they get results. But how many people can maintain 2 workouts a day and following all those things? Most probably can't. And so one of the important perspectives to have when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to losing body fat and keeping it off, is if a habit is not sustainable, your results probably won't be maintainable. And so what I tend to find works best for a lot of people, yes, you can focus on a rigid and aggressive diet, for the first part of a transformation. That can work incredibly well, because when you start to see those quick results, you buy in, you commit, and you continue doing the things. But we can't stay with that forever. And so long-term, what tends to be best is what I call a more flexible approach. If you want to use kind of a popular buzzword or diet phrase, it would be a flexible dieting approach. And the reason is, when you have a flexible dieting approach, this does require, at least in the beginning, some tracking of your food, your calories, is you can have what we call discretionary calories. So let's say you have 2,000 calories per day. as part of your diet for fat loss, 10 to 20% of those calories could be discretionary, meaning you could fit some of your favorite foods directly in there. Maybe it's a glass of wine that you have each night. Maybe it's chocolate. Maybe it's like you have a slice of pizza, whatever it is. And as long as you're focusing on your calories and on your protein, you can still be able to fit some of those foods in directly while having the flexibility to enjoy your favorite foods. And so where a lot of people get stuck is they follow these ultra rigid plans. And by extension of following these ultra rigid plans, it's not practical. It's not sustainable for the long term. And when it's not practical and sustainable, they start to feel like a failure. They backslide and voila, they end up back at square one. So, a lot of people look at the idea of tracking calories as something that's going to be ultra restrictive. It's going to, be a pain in the ass. The reality is, if you want the flexibility to enjoy your favorite foods while still getting the results that you want, it is going to be the best option simply because it allows you to focus on the most important things. And that's going to be getting your protein intake, and that's going to be creating a calorie deficit consistently, right? So that's the key thing. You might have to make some sacrifices. Is it sometimes a pain in the butt to track? Maybe, but you know what? It's a lot better to do that and be in incredible shape and be happy with the results that you're getting than trying to straddle an ineffective strategy and wondering why it's not working. All right, next question. What is the deal with net carbs and free calories? Okay, so if you pull up something like a Quest bar, a lot of these protein bars, what you're going to see is it has carbohydrates and then it has only 4 net carbs. So the idea here is they pack these things with fiber, and by extension, your body does not absorb all the calories that come when you're consuming fiber because your GI tract helps move everything along, take a great dump, and you're all set, right? Well, here's where we run into issues. Why do we just apply that directly to processed foods? Because if we look at beans, we got fiber, we got protein, and we have carbohydrates. So if we subtract all the calories directly from that, and now we only have, 5 grams of carbohydrates, whatever it is, because of the fiber intake, we start to have numbers that are all over the place. It doesn't really make sense, right? And so what I want you to understand with like net carbs and free calories, you can't look at processed foods and have like one way of measuring and then not apply that across the board, right? Like scientifically, it doesn't make sense to use different conditions of measurement for different things. You're just going to have numbers that don't make sense. And so my recommendation is like with net carbs and free calories are often, people will say like, hey, eat as many greens as you want, they're free calories. Just track everything. If you're going to track everything, and then you objectively have at least the same unit of measurement across the board, which is going to allow you to make the best informed decision possible when it comes to your nutrition. But net carbs, totally a marketing gimmick for like the low carb diet culture that's going on right now. Doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, but if you're trying to count calories as a primary way to control for fat loss, then it's something you want to pay attention to. Now, alcohol. How do we handle alcohol specifically when it comes to tracking? So if we look at fats have 9 calories per gram, proteins and carbohydrates 4 calories per gram, and alcohol is going to have 7, right? So alcohol is more calorically dense than carbohydrates, more calorically dense than protein, not quite as dense as fat. And so what you can do is you can track your alcohol in terms of calories and consider either a fat or a carbohydrate. And so you still want to be able to track what you're having in terms of alcohol intake if you are concerned about how many calories you're consuming, because it's still going to count, right? So that's one primary thing. But a few simple tips that you can use when it does come down to consuming alcohol. And I'm not going to be one of those people that goes on a fucking rallying cry saying you can never drink, you can never do this again. Like, you're an adult, do what you want. We all know that it's not healthy. We all know that it can also be fun. And so if you want to make room for what's fun and you enjoy it, awesome, knock yourself out. If you don't drink, awesome, even better for your health. But when it comes to alcohol, a few recommendations. 1, understand that alcohol is going to negatively impact your recovery. So if you're going to be training on a particular day where you're going to be also consuming alcohol, keep your training and your workout as far away from each other as you possibly can. The reason is, again, if we have alcohol, we're going to shut off fatty acid mobilization and fat burning. We're also going to shut down muscle protein synthesis, which means our recovery goes down. In addition, the following day, after consuming alcohol, stress is likely going to be elevated. So cortisol is going to be elevated and your sleep and recovery is going to be compromised. So I would not recommend going out hard one night and then going down and having an aggressive workout. You'd be much better keeping the intensity lower. Even a cardiovascular session is going to be a better bet than, say, heavy lifting. So when it comes directly to beyond your training with your nutrition, focus primarily on protein and plants. Again, because you're going to be consuming liquid calories that aren't the most satiating, right? Like, we want to be able to focus on getting enough protein and the micronutrients that our body needs in order to look, feel, and perform its best. And that's only going to happen when we nail our nutrition earlier in the day. Finally, we want to avoid drunk food. In a perfect world, again, that Domino's pizza that you're having after a few too many cocktails, because your body has shut down muscle protein synthesis, because it's not focused on burning fat, it's just trying to get the ethanol and all the toxic shit out of your body. It's not going to effectively be able to break down that food that you're having. It's going to be more likely to be stored as fat. So as enjoyable as, getting some street food can be, at least in the moment, probably not a couple hours later when it hits your GI tract, the more likely that those calories are going to be stored as fat. Now, when it comes to choices with alcohol, ideally what you want to do is drink whatever you're going to be able to drink without dramatically over consuming. Obviously, if you're getting drunk, if you're getting hammered, that's going to negatively impact your health and performance a lot more than 1 or 2 drinks. If you're having a couple drinks, again, try to stick with like a light beer, stick with wine if you can tolerate it. I can't sleep even if I have 1 glass of wine like 5 hours before I go to bed. It's wild, getting old, I guess. Or calorie-free mixers with whatever spirit of your choice. Again, could be like a tequila soda, vodka soda, something like that is going to be a good option. If you want to drink something on the rocks, knock your stuff out with that as well. You can definitely fit alcohol into your diet if you want to be able to lose fat. But again, you just want to account for what you're having and take those strategies and apply them directly to minimize the downsides. Eric, why is there so much protein in most recommendations for fat loss and building muscle? All right, so protein. When we're looking primarily at body composition, losing fat, building muscle, looking great naked, all that cool shit that we like to talk about, ideally, what we see is 0.82 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if essentially that means, again, pound of body weight or pound of target body weight, let's say you're 200 pounds, that would give you the range of about 165 grams of protein to 200 grams of protein. That's basically the range that you would want to be in when it comes to either building muscle or losing fat. A couple of considerations here, though. Let's talk about the muscle building side. First, consuming more protein than that won't necessarily increase your ability to build lean muscle, especially if you're natural. If you're enhanced, so on super maximal levels of testosterone replacement therapy, just blasting gear, just trying to get jacked, whatever it is, your body can handle more protein. We have increased muscle protein synthesis from the drugs. And so that's why you see the diets of pro bodybuilders will have insane amounts of protein. Now, there is kind of a diminishing, effect with that protein intake as well. I believe I was reading this from Lane Norton today, so I don't have the study in front of me, but the difference was like 15 to 25 grams per day. So it's not massively different. That said, when we're in a calorie surplus looking to build muscle, we're also going to have higher levels of carbohydrates. And higher levels of carbohydrates are protein sparing, and they can obviously help support delivery into your cells. And so the need for high levels of protein is actually a little bit lower when we're talking about building muscle than it is for losing body fat. And let's break down that aspect, right? So when it comes to losing body fat, we want sufficient protein because it's going to help us preserve lean muscle as long as we're training correctly. We're lifting weights as the primary focus. That's the entree, cardio side dish. And the reason for that being is when we hold and retain as much lean muscle as we can, that's what preserves our metabolic rate. And so we can prevent plateaus. We can prevent what we call adaptive thermogenesis, or at least reduce the amount of it. And that's going to help you be able to lose fat more consistently. In addition, diets that are higher in protein consistently show that people are more satiated. When you're more satiated, you feel full. When you're restricting calories to lose body fat, you're going to be more likely to keep that calorie deficit, which is the key driver for losing body fat. In addition, the thermic effect of protein is about 30%, meaning 30% of the calories that you consume directly from protein are broken down directly through taking that piece of steak, chewing it up, and trying to break it into amino acids to deliver it all throughout your body. So the thermic effect of protein is about 30% versus 6 to 8% for carbohydrates and only 2 to 3% from fat. And so if we think about it, if we are hungry, if we are in a calorie deficit and we're going to overconsume one thing, we want to overconsume protein because it's very difficult to store protein, and 30% of those calories are already burnt directly through breaking down protein into the usable amino acids. Next up, regarding the importance of protein is, we want to be able to retain as much muscle as we can. And so when people are struggling with muscle retention in fat loss, again, we can sometimes even push it above that 1 gram per pound. That's going to be very individual. But we also have age-related muscle loss. After about age 30, if we're not getting a high protein diet, if we're not training consistently, we will start to lose muscle. And so what happens for a lot of people is they have a gradual slide down. Their body weight might even stay the same, but they just lose a little bit of muscle, build a little bit more fat, lose a little bit of muscle, build a little bit more fat. And as this happens, their metabolic rate gradually changes, and voila, it's like they add 15 pounds, it feels like overnight. The reality is what's happened is changes happen very slowly. Then all of a sudden, when we're losing lean muscle, and then we are obviously gaining body fat, but weight was staying the same until we just kind of have a vacation or a moment where we gain weight and it just never comes back off. So as we get older, we actually want to consider working more towards that high end of protein intake simply because we have the age-related loss of lean muscle. And unless we work to combat that, then we also have a concurrent slowdown in terms of metabolic rate, which means if you try to eat the same way that you did before, but now you have less muscle, you're going to be more likely to gain body fat, which is why it's so important to get enough protein. So hopefully that answers your primary questions regarding protein intake. Next one up. Eric, I feel like I'm in a plateau. I haven't been able to see progress over the last week or so after losing about a pound a week consistently for the last 6 to 8 weeks. All right, so here's what we want to consider. I wouldn't really consider anything a plateau unless you're not seeing any movement for about 2 to 4 weeks and you have perfect compliance. And so what do I mean by that? By perfect compliance, I mean like you're getting all your sleep, you're hitting your calories every day, you're hitting your protein every day, you're not missing workouts. And so a lot of times what happens, people feel like they're plateaued when we're in reality, either a unit of measurement change, we'll get into that in a second, but it often comes down to inconsistency. They haven't been as consistent with what they're doing previously. And so we can't really call something a plateau unless you're being very consistent in all the actions that are required to overcome said plateau. So we want to keep that compliance with everything you're focusing on at least 80 to 90%. Like if you go on a vacation for 5 days, then you're like, I'm in a plateau because I didn't lose weight this week. Well, the reality is you went on vacation and probably ate your face off, which is cool. It's vacation. I want you to enjoy yourself. But that's just the perspective that we need to take. Now, when it comes to actually like looking at a plateau as well and like measurement, one of the important things that you need to do is like if you're measuring your weight, if you're measuring your body fat, we want to do it in the same day each week in the same exact status in terms of hydration. So for me, I wake up 5 a.m. I take my pictures. Before I take a piss, but like before I have any water or anything else, every other condition is controlled and going to be the same, right? And if you operate from a condition of like, hey, today I'm going to take my body weight, and then next week I'm going to do it like 6 hours later after I've had a meal, you're going to have incongruent units of measurement. And when that happens, again, it's going to skew the results you're having, and it makes you probably think you're not getting results when in reality is like you just have different water retention for a different time of day. So that's another important consideration. But if you do get to that place where you are truly in a plateau, really depends on 2 factors. One, if you've been dieting aggressively, sometimes what you actually need to do is you need to pull out and go in closer to maintenance calories for a couple weeks. This can give you a mental break and it can give your hormones a bit of a break directly from the stresses of dieting. If you're just getting started, one thing you can do here is you can increase your activity level instead of taking your calories lower. And this tends to be a little bit less stressful actually on the body than just taking your calories lower and lower and lower. I think one of the important things to remember is when it comes to fat loss, what we want to be able to focus on is we want to focus on being able to keep calories as high as we possibly can while still getting the result that we want, because that is going to be a lot better in terms of long-term metabolic health and hormonal health. So that's an important consideration for you to have right there. Fasted cardio. I see a lot of people recommend doing fasted cardio. Does it have any inherent benefit? Research on this is interesting. When you're doing fasted cardio, what happens is you increase fatty acid mobilization, meaning because we're coming up, when you sleep, you're fasted, insulin levels are very low. And so by extension, because we haven't had food yet, we're fasted, and we go to exercise, our body's going to pull more directly from stored body fat. Cool, right? Well, that's what happens in a vacuum. But there's also research that indicates later on during the day that there is kind of an inverse effect, that your body will actually slow down the use of stored fat as fuel later on after a day of harder fasted cardio. So what is my overall take on fasted cardio? I think fasted cardio primarily works for people because if you're doing cardio fasted in the morning, it's because you are a disciplined SOB and you're probably nailing everything else when it comes to a calorie deficit, eating well, and training consistently. And while the fasted cardio might help, it probably helps you be more consistent because you're doing it at a time where you can stay very consistent with it. Whereas if you push activity later in the day when life gets a little bit crazy, then it becomes a lot easier to miss a workout, right? So I do feel like there's an inherent benefit to fasted cardio because it gets people to knock out that cardio regardless, and it provides a great anchor point. And frankly, a lot of physique competitors have used it for years. Like I think anecdotally that's important as well. But purely from the idea of like, will it have a magical effect in terms of body composition? No. I would say if you're getting your cardio done and you do it in the morning, it would be about the same as somebody who's getting the same cardio, follows the exact same plan if they did it later in the day. It just comes down to whatever's going to help you be more consistent. I like to use intermittent fasting. Should I eat before early morning workouts? So this is interesting. Ideally, if you're using intermittent fasting, it's for fat loss or maybe maintenance. Not a good diet when it comes to building lean muscle. That's an important nuance. What's interesting is there appears to be somewhat of a difference in terms of like how our body will use certain fuels when we're in a cut versus when we are in a calorie surplus. As an example, it appears your body's actually a little bit better at breaking through larger chunks, larger amounts of protein, say 80 to 100 grams of protein during a fat loss phase simply because there's a scarcity of nutrients. Your body's very smart, right? Versus building lean muscle, like, yeah, we have kind of an upper limit of muscle protein synthesis. You're probably better spacing that meal out just a little bit more. Meaning, should you eat before your early morning workouts? The idea of like getting a meal in before probably isn't going to have a huge overall impact. It's going to be more of a matter of personal preference than anything else. And so in the case of an early morning workout, if you feel better with a little bit of food in your stomach, go for it. No doubt your performance will likely be better if you're in a semi-fed state. But if you have to get up at 3 a.m. to have a meal so you can train at 5 and you're compromising your sleep, that's going to negate any benefit. So the biggest thing that comes on with early morning workouts is going to be a matter of primarily personal preference. If you control your calories and your protein for what your goals are, it's probably not going to make that big of a difference. And if you do want to have something that's maybe quick and on the go, well, what I would recommend, have like a protein shake and a banana, like as you're going into the gym. Or you can even do branched chain amino acids with, 30 grams of highly branched cyclic dextrin directly during your training. That's going to provide a little bit more juice for you to be able to push through a hard workout. All right, final question is regarding training to failure. See that a lot of people recommend training to failure. How often should I do it? Training to failure, important nuance. You have to be able to train hard enough. You have to be able to create progressive overload if you want your body to change. Where a lot of people struggle is they do the same workout day in, day out, the same weight that they were doing 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 12 months ago, and they wonder why their body doesn't change. So we need to get stronger over time. That's crucial. Now with training to failure, a couple of things that we need to consider. One, we always want to be safe when we are doing it because obviously as we're pushing directly towards failure, we're not able to potentially complete a rep, technique can go out the window. So you have to be able to do so in a safe manner to prevent injury because getting injury, if you're not consistent, well, that's going to absolutely crush your ability to get results. We want to primarily focus on training close to failure often and to actual failure rarely. So let me break that down. Close to failure, what I generally recommend for our clients is what we call 1 to 2 reps in reserve. Meaning when you are finishing a set, you should have 1, maybe 2 reps left in the tank with a gun to your head that you could complete. And so this is very difficult to do if you're training hard enough, right? And so what I would recommend you do in your next workout would be to go through and actually take an exercise, say like a dumbbell bench press, use a spotter, please, and go to complete failure. A lot of times what I find that people are underestimating how much they can do by 30 to 50%, right? Let's say you're using a weight that you're doing for 10 reps. If you can get 15 reps on that set, actually take it to failure, you're not really training hard enough to elicit the results that you want. And so what we want to think about is 1 to 2 reps shy of failure on most exercises. Now, failure rarely. If we are, the best way to use like failure training techniques is going to be with primarily isolation exercises or machine-based training. And the reason here, obviously the risk of an injury goes up as we get closer to failure. And so if we get to a point where we're doing an exercise like a deadlift to failure, the chance of you having a pretty shitty injury go up quite a bit. Comparatively speaking, if we're doing a hamstring curl, we have the external support directly of the machine, which allows us to take those muscles to complete exhaustion and sometimes beyond. And so you have to be intelligent with how you train to failure because it's incredibly demanding, especially if you're on a fat loss cut and you don't have enough calories coming in. And so train close to failure most of the time, 1 to 2 reps in reserve, and then train to failure. Rarely you can do this 1 or 2 exercises at the end of a workout. Maybe you're doing a burnout on like dumbbell bicep curls, like that's fine. But we just have to make sure that we are mitigating the risk across the board. All right, gang, that's all we have for the Q&A session today. As always, make sure you're checking that out over on Instagram at Bach Performance on Monday when we drop over that Q&A question box. We should call it? Yeah, we'll call it a question box. All right. And stay tuned to the Look Great Naked podcast. Anywhere you can check out podcasts, drop us a review. And if you like this episode, let me know and I'll create more just like it. Hope you're having a great day. And remember, success comes down to the ruthless execution of the basics.
Hey, it's Eric here again. Now, there are 3 ways that I can help you look great naked. Number 1, if you want to grab a free copy of the Look Great Naked protocol to help you lose body fat without counting calories, then go to bachperformance.com/free training. Number 2, if you're a busy guy looking to build muscle, then I recommend checking out our Minimalist Muscle Blitz, which has helped over 1,000 men build muscle without living in the gym. Just go to minimalistmuscleblitz.com. The link will also be available in the show notes. Or number 3, and last, if you want to work with me directly and get the best results possible, apply at bachperformance.com/coaching to look great naked without living in the gym. Until next time, my friend,